One of my subscribers named Elena shared this story with me, and the night she turned her car around on black ice was the night she finally stopped begging to belong. I was driving 80 miles an hour on a road glazed in black ice. My hands were steady, too steady. The passenger seat beside me was empty. The 3 boxes of hand-painted truffles I had spent 4 months perfecting were gone. My phone vibrated against the center console every 3 seconds, lighting up the dark cabin. Mom. 12 missed calls, 7 texts. The last one said only, "Where are you?" I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel guilt. For the first time in 28 years, I felt something surgical. I pressed answer. Silence waited on the other end, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to crawl back. "Did you enjoy my gift?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, flat, controlled. Before she could respond, before she could unleash the performance, I ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and watched the speedometer climb. Have you ever had to walk away from a family gathering just to save your sanity? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who had to choose peace over proximity. To understand why I left, you need to understand the place I was fleeing. We called it the Glass Fortress, my parents' winter estate in Lake Tahoe. A cathedral of steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like corporate headquarters for a family that treated emotion as liability. It was beautiful in the way a scalpel is beautiful, sharp, expensive, capable of cutting you open. I had arrived 48 hours earlier carrying the scent of vanilla bean and tempered cocoa butter into a house that smelled like lemon polish and judgment. My name is Elena Vance. In a family of sharks, I was the only one who bled. My father, Arthur Vance, is a federal judge. My mother, Catherine, is a retired prosecutor who approaches social status like litigation. My brother Julian is a corporate attorney who bills $800 an hour to argue over punctuation. My sister Bianca works in mergers and acquisitions, dismantling companies for profit. And then there was me, the chocolatier, the liability. Dinner at the Vance house wasn't nourishment, it was cross-examination. We sat at a marble table cold enough to chill bone. My father presided at the head like the roasted duck was evidence. "So, Elena," Julian began the first night, swirling wine like a closing argument, "still operating out of that shared kitchen, or have you accepted that sugar doesn't build retirement accounts?" "Business is good," I replied quietly. "I hired my first assistant." Bianca laughed. "An assistant? For what? To help you lick spoons? Dad's clerks earn more in a summer bonus than you make all year." My mother sighed theatrically. "Now, Bianca, be kind. Elena is artistic. Not everyone thrives in the real world." That was the script. I was the soft one, the fragile one, the hobbyist playing with chocolate while the adults governed civilization. But sitting there, watching them dissect me with professional precision, I realized something. They didn't want me to succeed. My failure was their common ground. It was the glue holding their egos together. The breaking point didn't happen at dinner. It happened in the study. Christmas Eve, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had just finished wrapping bespoke truffle collections for each of them. They weren't candy. They were apologies dipped in gold foil. For my father, dark chocolate infused with aged whiskey and smoked sea salt. For my mother, white chocolate ganache with edible gold leaf and rosewater. I wanted to leave them on his desk as a silent offering, a plea. See me, not as a disappointment, as an artist. I was in socks, my steps quiet on hardwood. The study door was slightly ajar. I reached to push it open and heard my name. "We can't keep enabling this delusion," Julian said, his courtroom voice, calm, final. Elena is 28. She barely clears 48,000 selling cookies. It's embarrassing." "It's not just income," Bianca added. Papers rustled. "I pulled her credit report. She's carrying debt from business loans. One bad month and she's insolvent. We need to intervene." My chest tightened. I didn't move. "I agree," my father said. His voice was the gavel. "Tonight, after dinner, we do this structurally. Facts only, no emotion." "She needs structure," Julian continued. "I've spoken to the firm. We can place her as a paralegal. Data entry, 60,000. Benefits, stability." "And her room?" my mother asked casually. "Cousin Vanessa needs space for her clerkship in February," Bianca replied. "Turn Elena's room into file storage. If she accepts the job, she can rent a studio. If not, we cut her off." "And her little business?" my mother asked. "It's not a business, Catherine," my father said, his voice cold with disdain. "It's an easy-bake oven phase that lasted a decade. She's sugarcoating reality. It's time we forced her to grow up." I stood frozen in the hallway. The warmth drained from my body. 4 months of planning, years of effort, reduced to a punchline and a problem to be corrected. They weren't worried about me. They were embarrassed by me. And they had already decided my future without ever asking what I wanted. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not grief, clarity. I looked down at the gold-wrapped truffles in my hands. Apologies, offerings, attempts to earn love from people who only valued leverage. I didn't knock. I didn't confront them. I walked back to my room. I packed, and I left before dinner. When my mother called, when the messages poured in, when she demanded to know where I was, I didn't apologize. I asked one question. "Did you enjoy my gift?" Because this time, the truffles weren't filled with whiskey or rosewater. They were filled with truth. And by the time they realized what that meant, I was already gone. It wasn't just that they didn't respect me. It was that they had a plan to dismantle me. They had pulled my credit report. They had lined up a job I would hate. They were planning to erase my bedroom, my sanctuary, to store legal files. In that moment, the hurt vanished, replaced by a sudden intellectual clarity. I realized I was looking at a system. In family therapy theory, there is a concept called the identified patient. In a dysfunctional family system, one person is unconsciously selected to be the carrier of all the family's problems. I was their symptom. By focusing on my failures, they could ignore the fact that my father was emotionally absent, my mother was deeply insecure, and my siblings were miserable workaholics. They didn't just think I was a failure, they needed me to be one. My incompetence was the pedestal they stood on. If I stayed for that dinner, if I sat there and let them present their evidence, I would be accepting that role forever. I would be validating their court. I backed away from the door, step by silent step, until I was around the corner. Then I turned and ran to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't hyperventilate. I felt a strange buzzing energy in my fingertips. I looked around the bedroom that had been mine for 20 years. The lavender walls, the bookshelf filled with my culinary school textbooks, the framed photos of us skiing when we were actually happy. They were going to turn this into a storage closet. They had already evicted me in their minds. They were just waiting to serve the paperwork. I opened my suitcase on the bed. I didn't pack everything. I only packed what I needed. Her eyes flicked to Julian with naked disdain. In her world, he was invisible, an inconvenience, a servant who had wandered through the wrong door. The crowd shifted. Nicholas emerged. I'll give him this. He looked immaculate. A tuxedo worth more than my first car, a glass of amber scotch in his hand. He moved with that easy, predatory confidence of someone who has never truly faced consequences. He didn't glare. He smiled. He walked straight up to us and ignored me completely. Stopping in front of Julian, he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, You must be the driver." He pulled a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket and slid it into Julian's breast pocket. "Why don't you move your car around back? You're blocking the Porsches." My father, Gregory, appeared behind him, laughing loudly. "You tell him, son," he said, clapping Nicholas on the shoulder. "Good help is hard to find." Polite, cruel laughter rippled through the room. Mara smirked behind her champagne glass. I felt the old reflex rise, the instinct to shrink, apologize, retreat. Then I looked at Julian. He didn't bristle, didn't argue. He glanced down at the $5 bill, then back at Nicholas, and smiled. Not warmly, politely, like a wolf observing a sheep explain why it shouldn't be eaten. "I'll keep this safe," Julian said softly. My mother herded us toward a corner table, isolating us like a stain she couldn't quite scrub out. She thought she was minimizing the damage. She didn't realize she had just locked herself in a room with the only people who held the detonator. They believed they were hosting royalty. They didn't know the kingdom had already been seized the morning before. Dinner arrived. White-gloved servers placed filet mignon before guests who had quietly bartered their ethics to afford it. I didn't touch my plate. I watched my father, Gregory. Stand up and tap a silver spoon against his crystal wineglass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the murmur of the room. The conversation died. He looked around, a king surveying a kingdom that was already burning. He just couldn't smell the smoke yet. He raised his glass to Nicholas, to the man of the hour. Gregory boomed, his voice thick with unearned pride. "To Nicholas, the son I never had." He paused for the polite laughter that followed. It came obedient and hollow. Then his eyes found me in the back corner. They didn't hold love. They held a challenge. "You know," he continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical hush, "in this life, some children drain us. They take and take until there is nothing left. And others sustain us. They step up, they save us. We are blessed, truly blessed, to have Nicholas steering this ship." The applause was thunderous. Nicholas didn't look humble. He looked like a cat that had just swallowed a canary and was waiting for dessert. He leaned back, one arm draped over the back of his chair, basking in it. He smiled at my father, a conspiratorial grin that said, "We own this world." He thought he had won. He thought this public adoration was the final nail in my coffin. He thought I would shrink away, shamed by the comparison, crushed by the weight of their disapproval. But I wasn't shrinking. I was calculating. I remembered every time my father had compared us. "Why can't you be more like Nicholas? Nicholas knows how to handle people. Nicholas is a leader." They had worshipped the hand that beat me because it also fed them. They had traded my safety for his silence.
They broke me then, stripping away my voice piece by piece. But tonight I found it again, and it was sharper than steel. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. The sound cut through the applause like a gunshot. Heads turned. My mother's eyes widened in warning, her mouth forming a silent "sit down." I didn't sit. I projected my voice to the back of the room. "Is he the savior because he paid your bills, Dad?" I asked. My tone was conversational, deadly calm. "Or is he the savior because he knows about the tax fraud?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of 100 people holding their breath at once. My father's face went from flush to pale in a heartbeat. The wine glass in his hand trembled, sending a ripple of red liquid dangerously close to the rim. Then the gaslighting started. It was almost impressive how fast they switched gears. It was a reflex, a defense mechanism honed over decades. My mother stood up, knocking her napkin to the floor. "She is unstable," Sarah cried out, her voice shrill with panic. She turned to the guests, her hands fluttering, pleading for them to ignore me. "This is why we didn't invite her."
She is having an episode. She is imagining things, my sister Mara chimed in, sneering from across the room. God, Laura, you are embarrassing yourself. Sit down or get out. You're ruining everything. They were good at this. For years, they had made me question my own reality. They had made me think the bruises were my fault, the insults were jokes, the neglect was love. But I wasn't buying their version of reality anymore. I was holding the receipts. Nicholas stood up. He didn't look amused anymore. The mask of the benevolent sun slipped, revealing the predator underneath. He walked toward our table, his movements slow, deliberate. He was trying to intimidate me. He was trying to make me small. "You are making a scene, Laura," Nicholas said, his voice low, dangerous. He stopped a few feet away, looming over me, blocking the light. "Maybe you need another lesson in respect. Maybe you need to be reminded of your place." He raised a hand. It was subtle, just a twitch, a shift in his shoulder, but I knew what it meant. I knew the weight of that hand. I knew the pain it promised. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. Nicholas snapped his fingers, a sharp, entitled sound that echoed in the silence. Two security guards, burly men in ill-fitting suits who had been hovering by the entrance, stepped forward. "Get them out," Nicholas ordered, not even looking at them, his eyes still fixed on me with that cold, dead stare. "And if she resists, drag her." That was the moment the air in the room changed. It wasn't me who moved, it was Julian. He didn't lunge, he didn't shout, he simply stepped between me and Nicholas. It was a fluid, practiced motion, like a door slamming shut on a draft. He reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket Nicholas had stuffed the $5 bill into, and pulled out a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He put them on. It was a small gesture, but the transformation was absolute. The quiet, submissive driver vanished. In his place stood a man who looked like he could buy and sell everyone in this room before breakfast. The security guard reached for my arm. Julian didn't look at him. He just held up one hand, palm out, without turning his head. "Touch her," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, smooth and heavy as lead, "and you will be facing assault charges before your next paycheck clears, assuming, of course, that the checks don't bounce." The guard froze.
Nicholas blinked, his sneer faltering for a fraction of a second. "Who do you think you are?" Nicholas spat. "You're the help. Know your place." "My place," Julian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark in a tank full of goldfish. He opened the leather briefcase he had carried in unnoticed. He pulled out a single heavy cardstock business card and slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped perfectly in front of Nicholas's scotch glass. "I am not her driver."